It's about identifying sources of constraints on capitalization rates. So what I thought I'd do is just sort of talk about a variety of these constraints. So one obvious one is poverty. Poverty makes it very, very difficult for those who have an ability to do something to actually end up doing that very thing. But one of the things I think is true of poverty is that we tend, even as we acknowledge its importance in constraining capitalization, we underestimate just what a powerful constraint it is. And let me give you an example. In the book I talk about the famous Terman study that was done in California. And this is a study done in the 20s, began in the 20s in California. He does this thing where he gives an IQ test to 250,000 California school children. And he basically identifies the top 0.1%. So kids with IQs of 140 plus, genius level. And he tracks those kids for the rest of their lives, for 50 years. And he's trying to figure out what happens to them. He thinks what he's done is identified the cohort who will turn out to be the leaders in academia, in industry, in the people who will end up, running all the organizations and being the top politicians. And 20 and 30 years in, he realizes actually it's not true at all. And that these kids, they have a variety of strikingly different fates. There is a small group that does very well. The top 15% do actually occupy positions of real prominence in society. Then there's a big group in the middle who have pretty average lives. And remember, these are kids with adults with genius level IQs. And the majority of them they're kind of like have moderately successful professional lives. And then there is a chunk at the bottom who are by any measure to be massively disappointing. And the question that Terman has to wrestle with is, why did that group fail? What's the difference between this group who did beautifully well and this group who did so poorly at the bottom? And he runs through, this question obviously obsesses him, and he runs through every conceivable explanation for that difference. And he says, is it their personalities? And it's not. And he says, is it their habits? Is it their, it goes on and on down the list. And he realizes in the end that the answer is really, really simple. And that is that the kids who did best, these genius kids who ended up succeeding in the world, were the ones who came from wealthy households. And that the genius level kids who ended up utter failures in life were the ones who were born into poor families. Born into families where parents hadn't gone to college, where there weren't books in the home, where there wasn't the kind of cultural and institutional support for a habit of learning and a habit of intellectual activity. What he was saying, in other words, that even if you endow a child with a brain that is a 1 in a billion brain, that is not sufficient to ensure the success of that child. That poverty is such a powerful constraint on capitalization that it can reduce that genius child to a lifetime of worse than mediocrity. And like I say, it's the obvious constraint, but I think it's important to impress on for all of us to understand that poverty is probably a bigger constraint than we think. So let's talk about some other constraints that are maybe less obvious. I got really interested in this book in looking at the composition of elite sports teams. And if you do that, you find out all kinds of strange things. So at one point, I looked at the roster of the 2007 junior Czech hockey team. Now, I did not pick that team I picked that team at random. So I'm going to read to you the birth dates of the members of that national Czech team 2007. January 3rd, January 3rd, January 12th, February 8th, February 10th, February 17th, February 20th, February 24th, March 5th, March 10th, March 26th, April 22nd, May 5th, June 6th, July 2nd, July 19th, July 20th, August 15th, August 25th, August 31st, November 29th, and December 31st. Now, what's strange about that list? Did you notice? 11 of the 20 names are born in January, February, and March. It is a massively skewed distribution of birth dates towards the first 3 months of the year. If you look at any elite hockey team anywhere in the world, and for that matter, any elite soccer team anywhere in the world, you will see the same skewed distribution. But think about it. When you're 10 years old, who's going to be the best at a particular activity? The oldest kids, right? The kid who was born in January has 10 months of maturity on the kid born in October. And when you're 10 years old, 10 months is an extraordinarily long period of time. It can be 3 or 4 inches in height. So we think we are picking the best, and we're not. We're picking the oldest, right? And then we take the oldest, and we give them special coaching and all kinds of extra opportunities and all kinds of extra games. And lo and behold, 10 years later, they really are the best. We refuse to admit that our own rules, arbitrary rules, constrain capitalization. And we cling to a naive belief that these meritocracies that we have are entirely rational and efficient and fair. So this is a second constraint on capitalization. It's the stupidity constraint, right? And this also, you can apply this exact same logic to educational opportunity. If you look at how well kids do in school, based purely on their birth date, you see exactly the same patterns. In fact, there was a beautiful study done recently that tracked thousands and thousands of kids across the West and tracked them all the way through to their university level and found that kids born in the relatively youngest cohort of their age class were 11% less likely to go to college than kids born in the relatively oldest cohort of their age class. 11% is a huge difference. So third constraint. This is in many ways the most fun one and the most controversial one, but I think it's worth digging into. It's what I would say is an attitudinal constraint on capitalization. So I have a whole chapter in my book which is about this question of why it is that Asian kids do so much better at math than their Western counterparts. We just got a round of results from these international math test comparisons, I think a couple weeks ago. The difference is not this, the difference is that. Trying to figure out why, it seems to be the case that the reason for that difference has to do with attitudes. It has to do with what is the attitude with which the child in those two sets of cultures approaches a math problem. Let me give you an example. So these international math tests that we give to kids around the world, they're called TIMS. Well, when we give the TIMS to kids, at the same time as we give them the math test, we give them a questionnaire. How many hours do you study? Do your parents encourage you? Do you like math? All those kinds of things. But it's really, really long. And it's so long, in fact, that most kids don't finish the questionnaire. It's just too long, right? So a couple of years ago, this really brilliant guy, he would rank the countries of the world by what percentage of questions on the questionnaire their kids finished, right? And you know what he found when he did that ranking and compared it to the ranking of countries on the world by what percentage of questions on the math test their kids got right? The two rankings were exactly the same. And when I say exactly the same, I mean there was a correlation of 0.9. 0.9. In the history of social science, there has never been a correlation of 0.9 between two. It's the same thing. If you want to know how good a country does at mathematics, in other words, you don't have to ask that country's kids any math questions. You just have to make them do a task that requires them to sit down at a seat for an extended period of time and focus on a task, right? And if they can do it, they're good at math. Really, really fascinating. The Asian cultural attitude about work has the result of being a far more efficient way of capitalizing on math ability than Western attitudes. It's not in our curriculum, it's not in the quality of our teachers, it's not in the size of our classrooms, it's not in the amount of money we spend on schools. It is the attitude in the head of the child. And by the way, nor is it a problem in our genes, as some people would like to say, there's a whole. It's about culture. It's about a difference in attitude. And I think when you think about things that way, it powerfully clarifies how you go about improving our use of human potential. It means that you don't give up. It means that you don't look at a group that's not succeeding and say they are incapable of success. The capitalization argument, I think, enables us. It empowers us. It tells us that we can actually make a profound difference in how well people turn out if we choose to pay attention to the constraints imposed by poverty, by stupidity, and by attitude.